one of those. Good afternoon. I'm John Muskowski from Wisconsin Public Television. First, I want to thank Masood, who is a great force in our community. I'm sure just about everybody who's here has, under his persuasion and kindness, have been moved to join in this conversation. He's a great inspiration and really a pleasure to continue to know him after we spent some hours and hours together at the soccer fields talking about important things in the world. Tonight's program, this afternoon's program, will have a combination of presentation and video, and this extraordinary story of Arno and Pardeep and how they connected out of tragedy and loss and how they continue to work together. It's quite an inspiring story. And it's really extraordinary model and story of our state that we're sharing today. We want to thank the contributors to the art program that we're seeing, Moving Past Hate and Women Against Hate. This exhibit, which you can work through today and after our program, or right now if you'd like, brought to us by the work of Kelly Parks Snyder, Rachel Griffin, and Lee Garcia. I'd like to thank them for their work and contributions this afternoon. And you see the participating organizations who supported that work. In addition, we want to thank our sponsors for today's programs, many of whom have tables in the back. So we're going to have a presentation, we'll have Q&A, and as I imagine, as I see folks in this room, we'll have conversations following this, and I know people will be sharing resources, but many of those groups are represented in the back, and we invite you to continue the conversation and the engagement after the program. In addition, we'd like to thank the local sponsors, the individual donors, and of course, Monona Terrace for hosting this event. We want you to know that there's coffee. We're not so easily distracted that you can't get up and go get coffee and come back. We won't lose track. These folks are used to talking, not easily distracted. When we met with Masood in advance of this program, he talked about America being a last best hope. Now, I would push back and disagree with that. I think there's a lot of hope in the world, and I hope America isn't that last hope, even if maybe it's the best hope. And he's taken upon that to have our community and his organization and the board members to really fulfill that idea of what we think America is and what we think America should be. And a lot of that is rooted in these very difficult conversations that get us past hate. So thank you for joining us. And we'll invite you to join in the conversation. A little bit later after the presentations, Dee Hall will lead us in a Q&A session so you can participate as well. First up, I'd like to introduce Mayor Paul Soglin to welcome you and introduce our program today. Thanks.
First, just let me say thank you for all of you who've taken out the time to be here today and tell you how proud I am that the City of Madison is one of the sponsors of our gathering here today. Also, my apologies, but I'll have to be leaving. We have an annual family event in Chicago this evening, and I'd like to get there for that event. So yesterday was a pretty interesting day here in the United States. It was a celebration of the opening of the Civil Rights Museum in Mississippi. That's where Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were murdered. It's part of a representation of close to 50 people who were murdered during the course of the civil rights movement. It was 4 little girls in the basement of a church in Birmingham in 1963. And let me just say that one of the great honors of my life was attending the 50th anniversary of that event, celebrating the work of the civil rights movement. There was a murder of a gentleman who was offered police protection because everyone in town knew that his life was endangered if he would stop registering African Americans to vote. He said no, and within 2 days he was shot to death. We know the story of Medgar Evers, Viola Liuzzo, and the dozens and dozens of others who gave their lives, and many more, like Congressman John Lewis, who risked their lives for democracy, for the right to vote, something guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. Unfortunately, we have a president who doesn't understand why it was so repugnant for so many that he come to that event when he represents exactly what we were combating 50 and 60 years ago. The racism, the prejudice, the violence, the exploiting of the bigotry in order to advance his own political agenda, and of course, his colleagues right here in the state of Wisconsin who have rolled back the right to vote. When we were saying that the poll tax was wrong, that requiring people to take extraordinary examinations that a doctoral student in American history couldn't pass in order to cast a ballot, we now have identification requirements. We now have obstructions to the ballot box, which is part of a systematic symptom. Now, I don't expect Donald Trump to understand that. He doesn't understand that. If he did, he never would have spoke of the demonstrators in Charlottesville and the counter-demonstrators in the same breath. But that doesn't mean that we won't be successful in obtaining justice in this country, in this state. We will turn back the repressive voter laws that have been adopted in recent years, and we'll move forward in so many other areas. And as a matter of inspiration, I just want to share with you one story about a young woman that I met for the first time on Wednesday of last week. Karen's 20 years old. She was brought to the United States when she was 3. She's a dreamer. She and I had not met until Wednesday when we gathered together in Washington and went to visit a staff member for Congressman Ryan. Staff member from Congressman Ryan's office who I've met with before on the question of immigration. And on Monday of this week, several members of the Congress made the statement that there was no urgency, that there was no emergency, those are their words, in regards to enacting legislation to protect the Dreamers, the 780,000 of them. So Karen came to the United States and her family settled here in Madison, Wisconsin. She graduated from West High School. She has attended Madison College. After she was able to obtain a scholarship, she's now at the university. She has a part-time job at the Middleton Cross Plains School District. And as of Wednesday, her DACA protections were to expire in 51 days. So I guess we're down to about 50, 49, 48, 47 days left for her as of today. One of the things that happens when her DACA expires, she loses her driver's license. Now, what would you do? You could continue driving without a driver's license so you get home, school, and to work. Risk getting a ticket. She'll probably also, because she has no driver's license, not be insurable. She could give up her education, her job, and you can see all of the consequences and all of the stress in her life and in the life of her families. And for not just the 780,000 Dreamers and their families, but for all of the people in this country who simply want nothing more than a safe and healthy life. Every day is urgent. Every day is an emergency. Every morning, millions of people get up not knowing, like the couple who'd been here for 30 years and was just deported this past month, not knowing who in your family you will not see, who is going to end up deported despite the fact that they work hard, that they're committed to justice, they're committed to safety, and all they want is a better life. And the great irony of it is that we tell so many false stories that they are taking jobs from hardworking Americans. Well, let me tell you something, Scott Walker, who hasn't come out and said anything about this. Over 50% of the workers on Wisconsin dairy farms are immigrants. Now, with a factory, if nobody shows up for work, you can close the plant and reopen it 3 or 4 or 5 days later. There must be a few people here who've got a background on a Wisconsin farm or a farm somewhere with cows. And so we all know full well what would happen to those cows if we were to lose all of those dairy workers. What would happen to that industry? What would happen to Wisconsin families? And so, as we go about this, unfortunately, like so many of us growing up, I had hopes that weren't realized, that by the time I became an adult, all the problems of the world would be resolved. Because if good people did the right thing, there would be peace. Well, it's not too late for that to happen. And thanks to your being here, thanks to the great panel we've got here today, we will make that happen in our lifetimes. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Paul. Good afternoon. How is everybody doing? Good. So, I'm going to briefly talk about the purpose of this event. We have organized these events before where we organize for a few people and all of a sudden a lot of people show up. So this time I think we are pretty much secured, enough room for other people to come in. The purpose of this event, actually two things. Number one, engagement is the first critical step to fight against hate, build relationship, and promote peace. Number two, hate is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It is a human issue. We all have to treat it as such in a non-partisan way so that we can move forward. Lives are lost for no reason. Very sad. Today, you are going to see examples of both of those things that I just talked about. To deal with the rising hate in this country, we started a movement in the last quarter of 2016 called We Are Many United Against Hate. Get the first slide. Yeah. Our mission is very simple. We are common people, again, non-partisan way, spiritual, and other types of groups that we have, secular, rural, and urban, with our common goal. Goal is that we all need to work together to fight hate, bigotry, and racism, as common as it gets. And in the handout, you will see a lot more details in it that was given at the time of registration. If you look at the next slide, we have put together a management team of diverse group of people who runs this 501c3 nonprofit organization right across the state. We have one board member who is outside the state. We also have a very diverse group of our advisory board. And I will ask my advisory board members and board members, please come upstairs here to join me, to Can. We need a bigger podium. I don't have to read all of these people and their background, they are in there. But if you look at these guys, all of them are volunteer, dedicated to work together as one team, representing different faith organization, no faith organization, all across the state they came together to deal with this hate. So we appreciate it and thank you so much for your contribution. Diversity is America's strength. It's not a weakness. We also believe that America promotes unity and not uniformity. Differences of opinion are always welcome and respected. America, indeed, is a role model for other countries to follow. particularly in the Middle East, where they need a reform, deal with the situation. For that, we all have to be thankful to our founding fathers who gave us the liberty, equality, and justice for all. Let's have a resolution today to make sure that we all work together to protect the right of others while working on our own. America is our last hope. For those who are born in this country and have not traveled to overseas, you may or may not realize the value of America. When you look at the minorities in this country, they are as proud as anybody else, and they all call themselves as proud Americans. We as Muslims are in minority, part of the minority, about 1% of the US population, which is about 3.3 million people. We also do not differentiate between our identities, whether we are Americans or we are Muslims. We all are proud American Muslims. But who we are not terrorists. We go after terrorists with all of you together. Ladies and gentlemen, America is already great. We just have to keep it united and do whatever we can so the country is not divided. Let me remind you, and most of you in this room already know, what John F. Kennedy said during his inaugural address. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for the country. And my friends, the time has come that we always have to come together to make sure that we fulfill the dream of John F. Kennedy by eliminating the hate from the surface of this earth, by developing a very successful model right here in Wisconsin that can be duplicated elsewhere in the nation when we are successful. Let's start that model right here in Dane County. Today, I am very pleased to announce that the leadership of the Republican Party of Dane County and the leadership of the Dane County Democratic Party, not only they became the sponsor of this particular event, not only they promoted this particular event, but they decided to come together to deal with hate and join their hands. So at this point, I'm going to ask the leaders of both parties to come up here next to me if you can. Dave, you want to come over here? Barry, you want to come over here? Mike? So Dave Plum is the chair of the public relations, the Republican Party of Dane County, and Mike is the chair of the Democratic Party of Dane County. These are the people who became the co-sponsor and supported our event, went on television and talked about this event, and decided to work together in a non-partisan way moving forward. So, please, thank you so much. We appreciate it very much. Where do you see this kind of nonpartisan anymore? Do you see that somewhere? Wisconsin. You can see that in Dairyland right here. This is, in my opinion, is an excellent start in the right direction. God bless America, and God bless Kent County. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Masood. In introduction to Arno, as you saw there, Arno became involved in the white power movement at 17. He described himself as a reverend in the racial holy war, and you saw his reference to his musical work. Arno speaks of his addiction to aggression, violence, and hatred, and then at 24, the fear of losing his daughter and the kindness that other people showed him. So I'll repeat that because the first words when I met him this afternoon is he mentioned kindness. And hopefully we'll hear a lot of that, and we'll certainly see a lot of that today. But it was the kindness that people showed him that gave him a path to change. Arno's been an active speaker in the Forgiveness Project. He's founder, as you saw, of Serve to Unite, and the author of My Life After Hate, which will be available for folks after. He enjoys spending his time with his daughter, art, music, and he describes it as all forms of fearless, creative expression. At the top of his website reads, "I'm fairly confident that certainty is problematic." That's well said. Arno.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Masood, and everyone at We Are Many United Against Hate. You guys did an amazing job putting this event together, and Pardeep and I are both incredibly grateful. I also absolutely want to thank the Democratic and Republican chairs of Dane County for being here today. To me, that was one of the things I was most excited about, was seeing that we had literally people from either side of the political aisle who were in agreement that this kind of event is important, and they both wanted to get behind it. And I think that's something that all of us really need to be mindful of as we're getting wrapped up in our own political opinions and our own political positions, is that really everyone just wants a safe place to live. Everyone wants to be happy. We're all human beings, and when we start from that point, there's really no problem that we can't solve. So the name of the event today and the sponsoring organization, United Against Hate, I think is very important. There's a lot to contemplate there. In this age of very vitriolic political discourse, the word hate gets tossed about all over the place. I see people from the left saying it's, oh, the right, they're also hateful, and people on the right saying the same thing about people on the left. For that reason, I think it's really important to think about what hate is, what hate means. I'm someone who's particularly qualified to speak about hate. I was literally a hate monger for 7 years of my life. I cultivated hate in our society. I lived and breathed hate. I was addicted to it. And for the past 8 years, I have been an agent to counter hate. It's been my life's mission to diminish hate in our society. And I've come to understand that the best way to do that is by standing what we're for and not necessarily letting what we're against define who we are. Therefore, if people ask me what I do, a lot of times people will say, hey, he's an anti-racism activist, he's an anti-hate activist. I'm actually not anti-anything, because I'm not going to let what I'm opposed to define who I am, and I'm not going to let social illnesses define the conversations we need to have about them. I understand that to truly counter hate, we need to cultivate love in our society. We need to understand that everyone simply wants happiness, and neuroscientists and psychologists alike have recently deconstructed human happiness and found that it is literally composed of three things: kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness. The more of these assets you have in your life, the happier you are going to be. And in real sublime beauty about our shared human experience, all three of those things are available to each one of us in a boundless way, no matter how much money we have, no matter what color our skin is, no matter who we're attracted to, how we identify with gender, where we're from, what language we speak. kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness are there for all of us. And I think a common thread of kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness is compassion. Now, if we go back to think about what hate is, I've come to the conclusion, having walked my path, that hate is a willful denial of compassion. At least if we're talking in the context of human beings hating one another. I personally hate traffic. Some people hate broccoli. I love broccoli. I don't hate any vegetables. But you know, some people, there's circumstances in life that we might feel like we hate, or food, or maybe a piece of music or something like that. But what's really important to look at is human beings hating one another. And when we can see another human being suffering and tell ourselves we don't give a damn, that's hate. And it's very concerning to me that as voices of hate become more prominent in our society, sadly the response to those voices is quite often more hate. This definition of hate that I've arrived at was provided for me by someone who was a self-described communist. And it was during a planning meeting for a protest, a counter-protest of a neo-Nazi rally in West Dallas, Wisconsin in late 2011. I went to this planning meeting really lobbying for a counter demonstration away from the neo-Nazi gathering, to draw the media away from them, and to make our counter demonstration one about how beautiful multiculturalism is, how beautiful diversity is, and very importantly, how all the fears that the neo-Nazis are cultivating are ultimately unfounded. From my experience as a neo-Nazi, I felt that would be the most devastating response that could be made. Now, my communist friend told me that I didn't know how to deal with neo-Nazis, and that it was very important to them that they were in the face of the neo-Nazis and screaming at them and giving an aggressive response. And even when I tried to make the case that aggression feeds aggression, and that the neo-Nazis are really trying to provoke that, I was told that the person in question I was talking to said, "I will never show an ounce of compassion for a neo-Nazi." And that really saddened me, because not only was it playing right into the hands of the neo-Nazis, that's exactly what they were trying to provoke, it is literally answering hate with hate. Now, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a great hero of mine. I think he's a hero to many people in this room, and many Americans, and Americans from either side of the political spectrum. And Dr. King was really a fountain of wisdom and a fountain of inspiration, and he said so many things that literally changed the world that we live in. One of the things he very famously said was that hate begets hate, violence begets violence. It's a very simple concept, and it's one that I think we're overlooking in today's discourse. If we respond to hate with more hate, there is no way we're going to produce anything but more hate in our society. And as Paul pointed out, or excuse me, as John pointed out, I do believe that I'm fairly confident that certainty is problematic. I'm a Buddhist, and as a Buddhist, I understand that suffering stems from attachment and from our need to make sense of the world and to want to grab onto things and make them permanent. But I can say with certainty that hate will never solve any problems, that hate is never going to make our society healthier, that hate is never going to free anyone, hate is never going to lead anyone to a better place. So when I talk about meeting aggression with compassion, I'm talking about something that takes the drive of a warrior, someone who's not going to let fear dictate their decisions and dictate their thoughts. And when Pardeep and I are working with young people, particularly young men, I make the point of challenging them to say, if you think it's easy to respond to aggression with compassion, give it a try someday. It's very easy to reflect aggression. If somebody gets in your face and they're hostile with you, it's easy to return that hostility. And when we do that, we are subject to hostility in the sense that we are under it in a hierarchy. We are controlled by that hostility. The way to truly defy hostility, to defy hate, to defy violence, is to practice love. It's to practice gentleness. It's to practice caring about people and treating them with kindness when they least deserve it. As was mentioned in the ABC video we shared, I was a white power skinhead for 7 years, from the late 80s till the early 90s. I was an organizer of hate groups. I was a street fighter. I recruited other disgruntled white kids to join this gang and to go out and hurt people. I was the lead screamer in a white power band. I don't think singer is the right word. It certainly wasn't singing. Through personal interaction, through the violence that I radiated, through the music that we made, I did a lot of harm to this world. I did a lot of harm to innocent people because of the color of their skin, because I thought they were gay, because I was drunk and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I did a lot of harm to my family, and I did a lot of harm to myself. Today, it's very important to me to not only counter that harm, but to surpass it. I need to make a positive impact today to at least equal the harm that I had done 20 years ago. And I'm driven to do that by amazing friends I have, like Pardeep Kalika, by friends like our global mentors in Serve to Unite, which were mentioned in the video, people from around the world, from all backgrounds, all demographics, who embody what is most beautiful about being a human being. Embody kindness, embody service, embody gratitude, wisdom, courage, and compassion. These people are my teachers, and if it wasn't for them, I could be dead or in prison right now instead of here speaking with you. Now, on paper, I wouldn't have looked like the kind of kid who would have got involved in white power hate groups. I grew up in Mequon, Wisconsin. Mequon's a suburb of Milwaukee, a little bit north. It's very well-to-do. It's very conservative. It's predominantly white. I grew up in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. I never went hungry. I never took a beating. My parents were together. They both loved me very much. They both gave me a ton of positive affirmation. Throughout my childhood, I was told how wonderful I was, how gifted I was, how I could accomplish anything I wanted to accomplish. But I grew up in an alcoholic household, and my parents' relationship was very strained, and my parents fought constantly, and my mother was miserable. It was really at her lap at times to keep our household running, to keep things together, keep the bills paid, keep food on the table. And I could sense her misery as a child, and that hurt me. It made me suffer. And rather than being a good kid and saying like, hey mom, I'm sorry you're suffering, I love you, what can I do to help? I distanced myself from my mom and from my dad and from all the other adults in my life who really adored me and wanted to help me. And of course, as I distanced myself, my suffering increased. We human beings have a tendency when we're suffering to want to crawl out into a corner like a wounded animal and just keep to ourselves. And of course, that isolation becomes another component in our suffering, and a vicious cycle ensues. Pardeep and I, when we work with young people, we often do workshops called Hurt People, Hurt People. And we explore compassion, and we explore suffering, and we try to understand where violence comes from and where healing comes from. The idea that hurt people essentially reminds us that violence comes from suffering. I truly believe that all violence on earth, all violence throughout human history, comes from human suffering. Whether we're talking about a kid being bullied in a hallway at school, or a salty Facebook comment, or a violent extremist group, or the state response to violent extremism, all the way through world wars, all of that violence stems from suffering. My suffering as a kid led me to lash out at other kids. I was a bully on the school bus as early as kindergarten. I got a kick out of causing trouble. I got a kick out of making people angry. And I developed a habit for that thrill. And like any other kind of substance abuse, what gets you off that first time 10 times later is old news. You got to keep escalating things. So as I grew older, my antisocial behavior escalated. In middle school, I started breaking and entering into places. I started doing vandalism. I went from fighting in the schoolyard to fighting in the streets. At age 14, I started drinking myself. The first time I drank until I passed out, and I drank like that for another 20 years. By the time I was 16, I was a full-blown alcoholic. I was very familiar with violence. I had been violent since I was a little kid. It was second nature to me already as a 16-year-old. And I really had added to my adrenaline habit hate. I think every human being who was ever a teenager has had at least one moment when a parent or a teacher says, hey, you can't do that. And in this mess of hormones and emotions, you're like, ooh, I hate you. And fortunately for us, most human beings just let that pass and move on with their life. But for me, that became part of my addiction, part of the thrill. So I was not only like, ooh, I hate you, but I hate you, and I hate you, and I hate this school, and I hate cops, and I hate the government. And I got a thrill from that rush of directing hatred outward. It was then that I heard a white power skinhead band. And the music was really fast and aggressive like I liked it. I was already into punk rock by that time, which I still love. I never want to make it sound like punk rock is some kind of gateway drug to becoming a white power skinhead. I think there's a lot of great things about punk. I think it's important to question authority. I think it's important to think for yourself. I think it's important to not conform and to do things yourself. But to me, punk was about smashing things. And it was about anger and aggression. So when I heard this white power skinhead music telling me that the hate and violence I was already familiar with was because I was a warrior fighting for my people against this ominous Jewish conspiracy to wipe us off the face of the earth. And if I didn't succeed, the white race would be no more. There was a genocide going against us, and I had to fight to stop it. As ridiculous as that sounds, yes, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, to an angry, drunken 16-year-old with a habit for hate and violence, it was literally music to my ears. It gave context, it gave validation to the hate and violence I was already very familiar with, and I picked it up and ran with it. And as my friends and I started a white power skinhead gang in Milwaukee, and we started our own white power skinhead band, and our white power skinhead gang grew, we radiated hate and violence out into the world. Now, in addition to being a former white supremacist, I'm also a recovering IT consultant. I'm not going to go too deep into that part of my life because it's too traumatic. I mention it though because there's a tie-in here to computing. In this day and age, everything we do is on computers. You're looking at computers there. We all have computers in our pockets that are incredibly powerful. And the way the computers work is that we human beings provide input into the computer in one way or another, whether it's one of these archaic mouse and keyboard things or if it's a phone, we're doing it with our fingers or our voice. And our input will determine what sort of output the computer gives us. The world that we live in is a system, this human society, the ecosystem we live in. And the input that we put into it determines the output. So as my friends and I radiated hate and violence outward, the world reflected it back to us in no uncertain terms, and often in exponential multiples of what we were putting into it. So within 6 months, a very close friend of mine who I started the gang with and who was in my white power skinhead band had shot a kid that came to do a drive-by on our house. Within 2 years, another very close friend of mine was shot and killed in a street fight as he was out practicing hate and violence as I had taught him to do. And rather than take these unfortunate events as a wake-up call, we spun them to suit our narrative of hate and violence. We said that our friend was arrested because the police were controlled by Jews. We said that our friend was murdered because non-white savages were running the streets and it wasn't safe for white people. We knew that this wasn't true. But the narrative that we had assumed as our identities, the ideology that we had assumed as our identities, behooved us to spin reality to suit it instead of accepting reality as it was. I was involved in hate groups for 7 years, and I'm very fortunate to do talks like this quite often. I've been doing these kind of talks for 8 years now. I've done them all over the world. And one of the most frequently asked questions I get is, what made you change? What led you out? What was the reason that your entire life turned around 180 degrees? The one-word answer to that, which you may have gathered is not my strong suit, is exhaustion. It was exhausting to hate people on all sorts of levels and from all sorts of directions. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew it made me a horrible person that I was attacking people arbitrarily because of their skin color. There were times where as I was attacking someone, as my fist was hitting someone, there was a voice inside me that said, "What the hell are you doing? What is wrong with you? This is wrong. You are wrong." And I didn't have the courage to answer that voice. So I kept trying to suppress it with alcohol, with white power skinhead music, with white power literature, surrounding myself with other disgruntled white kids. That took a ton of energy. It sucked the life out of me. That was exhausting. It was exhausting to cut myself off from the rest of society. Cut myself off from culture that I had once enjoyed and taken for granted. Now, all of us being here in the great state of Wisconsin, I think we could probably come to consensus in this room that the greatest football team in the National Football League is the Green Bay Packers. Thank you very much. Thank you. And though Aaron Rodgers has been out for the season for a few games now, we are all diehard Packer fans, and we still love our team and we still root for them. I grew up a Packer fan, of course, but as a white power skinhead, I couldn't very well go watch the Packer game on Sundays. An NFL football team is typically a bunch of black guys, bunch of white guys, sometimes, Asian, Latino guys even. And all these people on the team not only have to get along, they have to work as a single organism. If they don't stand a chance of winning a football game. That entire process is very antithetical to the white power ideal. So when the Packers played on Sunday, I couldn't very well get my white power skinhead buddies together and sit down and watch the Packer game. That would have made me a race traitor, actually. So on Sundays, when I could sneak away, I would lock myself in a dingy little efficiency apartment I had and turn on this battered old TV, very low. I'd watch the Packer game. Woo! Touchdown! And as ridiculous as that was, the silliness of it, the hypocrisy of it wasn't lost on me. Something I loved to do that I grew up appreciating was in conflict with this white power ideology. It was exhausting to be constantly presented with that kind of hypocrisy. That sucked the life out of me as well. What was most exhausting, though, was when people who I claimed to hate treated me with kindness. When I started the white power skinhead gang with my friends, I would have been a junior in high school. Instead of being in high school, I had dropped out after sophomore year because I'm a gifted genius. I don't know if I mentioned that, but my mom says I'm a gifted genius. And I figured I didn't need to learn anything else after sophomore year, so I quit high school. And despite my parents' best efforts to keep me in school, they were unsuccessful. And my mom, being a very practical person, said, well, if you're not going to school, you're going to need to get a job. And she had a friend of hers from high school who had a t-shirt printing business, and she asked him to give me a job, which he did. So as a 16-year-old, I found myself printing t-shirts 40 hours a week, third shift. I thought I was very clever. I'd moved out of my house. I lived in a rundown house in the River West part of Milwaukee with a bunch of skinheads. I didn't have adults in my life telling me what to do. I could drink beer all the time. I could get in fights. And printing T-shirts for a living had kind of a noble cause to it as well. Like, I'm making my own money. And when I went to that job, I was very outspoken about my racist beliefs. I was always trying to recruit the white guys I worked with into my gang. And I was always debating with the black and Latino coworkers I had about my racial views. Everybody knew about it. And I was also wearing my flight jacket with a swastika on it to my place of work. Now, my mom did the pre-press artwork for these T-shirts and from home, and that's how she found out that I was wearing a swastika to work. Her friend Jack Cooper, who owned the business, was Jewish. And my mom called up Jack in tears, basically to give him permission to fire me. She said, I don't know where I went wrong, Jack. I don't know what to do with him. I would fire him if I was you. I wouldn't blame you at all for firing him. And rather than fire me, Jack said, he's a good kid. He's just going through a phase. And not only did he not fire me, he hired my skinhead buddies. One of my skinhead buddies back then is, I'm proud to say, is still a buddy of mine now, and he's from Madison, actually. His name's Pat O'Malley. And back then, as now, Pat's voice makes my voice sound like a prepubescent Swedish boy. And Pat was given the job of selling these T-shirts on the phone as a telemarketer. So he would call up T-shirt shops and malls and be like, hey, do you want to buy some Metallica T-shirts? And he actually sold a lot of T-shirts. There was one day I came to work and I was hungover and I'm in the corner of the lunchroom starving in this completely pathetic heap, and I didn't have a lunch because I was too busy drinking. And a black guy I was working with was opening up his lunch. He's got a sandwich cut in half. And he sees me there in the corner and he's like, hey, skinhead, you look hungry. You want to have this sandwich? And the last thing I want to do is accept this sandwich from him. I'm supposed to be the master race. Like, how am I the one without any food in the corner? But hunger is a pretty powerful motivator. So I get up and I snatch the sandwich out of his hand. I don't even say thank you. I go back in the corner and I'm wolfing down this sandwich. He doesn't bat an eye. He goes back to talking about the Packer game with his coworkers. And I'm kind of like, oh yeah, wasn't that awesome? Wasn't that touchdown? Oh, yeah, I can't talk to those guys. I hate black people. I hate Latinos. And I hate the Packers. As silly as those instances were, the kindness that those brave people demonstrated for me factored into the growing exhaustion that eventually led me to a point in 1994 where I was looking for an excuse to leave. It's very easy to be nice to nice people. Quite often I ask myself, like, why can't we all just be nice to each other? How hard is it? Why can't we do that? Well, the reason is hurt people hurt people. And when suffering isn't processed in a healthy way, it's quite often passed on to other people. And the people who are suffering are the people who need kindness the most, even when they seem to deserve it least. Now, rather than be subject to my hostility, my coworkers, my boss, refused to answer my hostility with some of their own. And instead, they showed me kindness. Instead, they had compassion for my suffering, and they forgave me. And they demonstrated for me how human beings should treat each other. They demonstrated the beloved community that Dr. King gave his life for, and so many others did in the civil rights movement, and so many other people are dedicated to bringing about today. That's why it's so important to me today to reiterate the power of those innocuous acts of kindness. I believe that all suffering is an opportunity for us to show compassion. And I believe that all violence comes from suffering. So when we can offer healing, compassion to our fellow human beings who are suffering, we put ourselves in a position to solve the problems that we face as a society. We put ourselves in a position to understand that as human beings, we have far more in common than we have difference. And when we meet at that place and we work from that foundation of our common humanity, we can realize all of our differences as assets as tools in a toolbox that we can draw from to address the catastrophic issues that we all face together as a human being. Speaking with someone earlier, they asked me what the biggest problem that we face in our society is. I believe our most pressing problem is the condition of this planet that we all share, that we all live on together. We need to get busy addressing that problem. And we can't do it when we are crippled by the social construct of race. We can't do it when we're crippled by political polarization. We can't do it when we are crippled because of religious intolerance, because of any other construct that we've come to believe makes us more different than alike. We need to come together, realize our common humanity, and get busy working to solve the problems that we face together as a species. Thank you all so much for being here today, and I look forward to the rest of the program, and look forward to all of you keeping in touch with us. Serve2unite.org with the number 2, and mylifeafterhate.com is my blog. Thank you all.
Pardeep is a native of India. He grew up in Milwaukee. He has degrees from Marquette University and Alverno College. Former police officer, is now an educator in Milwaukee. As you saw, Pardeep's father was president of the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin and was killed in the attack in 2012. Pardeep carries the legacy of his father, teaching peace, battling racism, bigotry, and ignorance. Welcome him.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, thank you. I know it's been a very long, emotional day, and it is never our idea to open you up without closing you off. So as we go out, I think today we might just want to stay opened up, and I say that in reference to as we open up ourselves, we can touch the lives of those that we know might be going through suffering, might be hurting. There's going to be circles that me, Arno, nor anyone on this board can reach, and only you can touch that person. So I know it's going to be tempting to, and I know that I love hugs, I love I love embraces, and I love condolences. But what we need from you today is we need action. We need commitment to action. So as we leave out today, again, just be committed to that. Watching this documentary never gets easy. And today, I am honored to be joined by somebody very special. And this person, I've watched this documentary, Arnold's watched this documentary probably 100 times, more than 100 times, within different communities all over the United States. And we've been able to bring this message and have people commit to action. And so we know that there's a lot of people who stand on that wall. And we're proud to be able to have another community in Madison stand on that wall as well. But one of the people that is not used to seeing this documentary, and he, for our family, he is the eldest patriarch in our family. And me and Arnold have a book coming out, and through this book, I found out how much he has meant to us, bringing a 6-year-old immigrant from rural India to the United States. He has recently retired after 40 years of being a veterinarian. And the dilemma about retirement sometimes becomes, now what? What do I do with my life? Dr. Wayne Dyer talked about the power of intention. And I want to let him know that what he did in 1981 was to start that intention. And while I'm used to watching this, where my father and 5 other immigrants were murdered in what was the deadliest hate crime committed in 50 years, as the mayor said, since 4 little girls endured the impact of a bomb intended for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which launched the civil rights movement into full gear. He is not. And so, with all due respect and love, thank you for your intention that you started in 1982, Dr. Kaliga. So, yeah, this movie, this documentary, the first time that I saw it was about a year and a half after the incident itself. And you can see sort of the progression of the incident to the response, to the call for action. And the first time that I actually watched it on TV, my son, who at the time of the incident was about 7 years old, or I'm sorry, it's 5 years old, and now is 9 years old. I sat with him, and I sat back there, and I kind of watched everybody watching it, and I watched children watching this, and it brought me back to that time of him watching it. And my son, you could tell that he was saddened when the shooting came about. He was there. It touched him deeply. And I thought, as a father, should I have my child go through this again? And I struggled with that for that minute and a half. And then I remembered who we are. See, when something like this happens to you, somebody can make you try to forget who you are, how strong you are. And we have this saying at 6, we have this saying at the end, it's, Nanak naam chardi kala, tere bane sarbat tapala. We say this saying every single time we go to the Gurdwara. I never thought much about it until this happened. What the saying means is, we shall be relentlessly optimistic for the good of all humankind. We said it every single day. A Sikh is a learner. A Gurdwara is where we learn. It literally means the door to the Guru, the teacher. A white supremacist on August 5th, 2012, committed one of the deadliest hate crimes. Now, a white supremacist committed this hate crime against Sikhs and asked the world, what did you learn? From a community of learners and teachers. And we have been walking this road for the past 5.5 years. One of the men I have been blessed to walk this road with is one of the most unlikely people, and you've heard him speak earlier on, and his name is Arnold Michaelis. When we started this, we started with the intention that we needed to make something better. We couldn't be defined by what happened to us. We need to be defined by what we did with it. And with that said, it kept coming back to that. Who are we? Who are we? A man walked into, I had a client the other day, and I gave him this book. And this book is Deepak Chopra's book. He's kind of a reluctant client. And so I said, well, let me give him a book. And he looks at me and he says, Pardeep, I can't read. And I said to him, how long you been saying that? And he says, what? I can't read? And he says, no, I can't. How long have you been saying, I can't? And he had to think about it. And for us, as we look around, for the people that are are here, just take a deep breath. Breathe in. And say, we don't even got to say, we don't even got to do a call and response thing, but just kind of look around and just say to yourself, we can and we will. Right? We can and we will. Go ahead, take a look around, and you just kind of mind do it. Put that intention out there. That same intention that I just asked you to do is the same intention that we've been doing. That's it. That's it. It's the same intention that we're going to go and we're going to leave out with. We can and we will. We are many, united against hate. So today, as we leave out, I would ask just one favor. To commit to action. Commit to action. And to understand that marginalized communities, even though we're victimized, are not defined by our victimhood. We are not defined by our oppression. In fact, I am just as much of a perpetrator as Arnold. We are attacking hate. Go out, all attack hate. Be a perpetrator. Thank you.
Thank you. Now it's time to welcome you to ask questions. Excuse me, we have mics in either row. And if you'd like to have a question, please line up. Dee Hall is here to moderate the Q&A. So I'll start with a question for Dee. Dee, we've been talking over the last month or so, and your organization has been engaged in a couple projects about hate. One that's about the Proud Boys and things like that. Maybe we could start with Dee talking about a little bit about that work, and then we'll go to the audience.
Is the mic, it's working. All right. Thanks a lot for having me. This has been a great, very emotional event. Our role, I'm with the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism, and what we do is journalism. We're not advocates. We're not Democrats, Republicans, or I think we can say we're anti-hate. I guess we are taking a side there. But we joined a journalistic enterprise that was arranged by ProPublica, which is the national nonprofit investigative reporting outlet. And they started back about a year ago something called Documenting Hate, because they were trying to document hate. They were trying to go with those FBI reports. You saw one of those held up there by the police chief. And it turned out that a lot of what goes on in this country is not actually reported at all to anyone. And so they started to try to create a database. They wanted to create some type of narrative about what's actually happening in our country, and over 100 news organizations, and we're one of them, has joined in that effort to try to sort of take the temperature of what's going on in our country, what kind of bias and hate is out there, and keeping in mind that a lot of what happens to people, a lot of the hate incidents that you talk about are rarely as dramatic as what Arno was describing, street fights and things of that nature. They're more subtle, but they're still hurtful. So we've done 3 stories now in the Documenting Hate Project. One of them was sort of a quick turnaround daily story, because just before Rosh Hashanah, there were some graffiti that was sprayed on the Gates of Heaven, right next to the Gates of Heaven synagogue, and it was just sort of shocking, and people came together very quickly around that issue. And then after that, we produced a story that kind of looked at the overall state of bias in the state, and what we found is in the past year or so, starting a while ago, but accelerating in the past year, there have been a lot more hate and bias incidents. There are some Jewish organizations that are reporting a lot of hate that's been directed toward members of their community. We found a woman who is a Muslim, who's a doctor, who was told for the very first time to get out of the examining room because a man did not want her to touch him because of her faith. So we're seeing incidents like that going on. It's a little deeper than just like the last election. It actually goes back quite a long time, and it has a lot to do, according to the experts we talked to, with people being, mostly white people, but people feeling like there's a demographic shift in our country and they need to choose sides, that they can't adjust to it, they want to fight against it. And the way they fight against that is in the ways that you have seen here, you know, ranging from mass shootings to just indignities that they inflict upon people that they don't understand and don't really know on a daily basis. And so that's our role. We also we published and broadcast a story about a group called the Proud Boys, which is not an official hate group, but it's not. We tried to categorize, we tried to describe the group and why its message, which has some overlaps with white nationalism, is so troubling to so many people. But what I'd really like to do is, enough about me, I'd really like to hear from any of you who have questions. We have 2 microphones up here. We'd like you to ask your questions. Please direct them to the panel member that you'd like to get an answer from, and we'll take as much time as we need. So, do we have any questions to start? I think I see Gil.
Yes, I actually have 2 questions. I think they're both for Arno. But I just wanted to say first that I went to the temple a few hours after the shooting. I was a reporter up until a couple of years ago, and I happened to be on an assignment in that area. I work out in Madison, but I was actually covering a candidate event of former Governor Tommy Thompson, who was running that year for state senate. And I got a call from my office telling me that this had happened, and I jumped in the car because I was in Brookfield, and I went over to the temple, which by that time was really chaotic outside, and and there were lots of increasing number of reporters there trying to figure out what was going on. There were a lot of members of the Sikh community who were also trying to do the same thing, and at that point it was still most of the people where I was didn't really know who or how many people had been killed. And watching this movie brought that all back to me, how I was trying to be a reporter and get the information and saw it wasn't really grief yet, because it was confusion about what had happened. I just wanted to share that it really, I was there at that time and tried to talk to members of the community as well as to the police. There were a couple of brief news conferences that went on when we were there that really didn't provide very much information. I didn't go on in reporting on the event because reporters from Milwaukee, from our outfit, Wisconsin Public Radio, picked up after that, and I came back to Madison. My question for Arno is, since you have, I guess, come out of the skinhead movement, have you been targeted by the community? And if so, how? And if not, why do you think? And then I know that in the article that appeared just before this, announcing this event, you talked about the importance of trying to understand people like Wade and not make them into monsters. I think what happens really, really often is that when we in the public see and read about what's happened, we try to explain it by saying, well, he must have just been really sick. And so those are the 2 questions.
Sure. As far as the first question goes, I honestly don't get a whole lot of hate mail from my old buddies. It comes on occasion. I actually haven't got one in a while, which makes me feel like I'm slacking. So I better turn it up a little bit. I've had more contact from people in the movement, as we called it, looking for guidance to get out, than I have hate mail. And so I'm happy about that. Every time somebody does contact me, I'm happy to correspond with them, sometimes get on the phone, sometimes meet them in person and help them walk the path that I did. As far as understanding people goes, a lot of people are very challenged with the idea of compassion for neo-Nazis, compassion for Wade Page. A lot of people would rather punch him in the face, and I know that's a very romantic notion, and images of Captain America and World War II soldiers come up. But in this time, in this place, when we physically attack neo-Nazis, we are serving their purpose. We are validating their persecution complex. We are driving people from the center further right. That happens, as can be evidenced by now the far right can cite Antifa as a leftist terrorist group who squashed free speech, and now they got another bad guy to point at. As I mentioned earlier, neo-Nazis want to provoke violence. They want to provoke aggression. And when you do that, you are putty in their hands. And in the exact same way that anti-Sharia people, Islamophobic people recruit for the so-called Islamic State, Antifa, other people who are cultivating aggression against neo-Nazis, they recruit for neo-Nazi hate groups. And I don't want to see neo-Nazi hate groups succeed, which is why I'm an advocate for compassion, and that by no means entails that we accept their actions. We don't accept their rhetoric, and I'm not a pacifist. If somebody attacks me or somebody in my presence, I will use physical force to neutralize them. But once they are neutralized, I will remind myself that they're acting that way because they are suffering, and that suffering needs to be addressed if we are to be victorious in our campaign against what they stand for. So when I talk about compassion, I talk about kindness, and I talk about forgiveness, I'm talking about it in a tactical sense. I'm talking about it as a means of seeing that hate rhetoric does not succeed. That is my intention, and that's why I'm an advocate for compassion and understanding.
And just really quickly about Wade Page, we have to understand that Wade Page grew up in this society. He was created by this society. When we get away from understanding the Wade Pages of the world, we relinquish ourselves to be able to do anything about any of that. Page went into the military. He was discharged. He grew up near Littleton, Colorado. He witnessed Columbine. That happened in his hometown. He became part of the movement following that. When he became part of the movement, he came back here. And I know enough people in Milwaukee that know him and his ex-girlfriend. So just from stories, I'm like, Wade Page proposed to Misty Cook, which was his girlfriend at the time, 2 weeks prior to this incident. He was rejected. He went into a spiral. All the other trauma that wasn't processed became part of what happened to him. If we don't understand the complication of any of that, there's no reason you should be doing any of this work. And I mean that in to say that we will be in danger if we start to vilify people rather than vilify the ideology. If we're saying that people are like that person's a racist and we're fighting racists as a personal problem rather than fighting racism, we're in trouble. So it's the two things, but we sometimes, it's easier to vilify the person, right? The actor rather than the action. We have to be careful on that.
Before I forget, I wanted to let everybody know, as soon as we're done here with the question and answer period, Arno is going to be signing copies of his book, My Life After Hate, and all of the proceeds will be going to servetounite.org, which is the organization that these two founded. Another question? Dave?
Thank you very much. Aside from being a Republican, I wanted to tell all of you that I am also a Christian. And as a Christian, I would like to thank both Arno and Pardeep for coming here today and showing us how two people that might or should hate one another can come together and show us how to defeat hate and move on to a better life. I do have a question for Arno. I believe when you were speaking, you said you were a Buddhist. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
I guess I would ask the question, how does faith play a role in your life It was easy to watch the 30-minute film and see Pardeep's, his commitment to his religion and what that did in terms of him reaching out to you. How does your religion play a part in this whole coming together?
I love that question. Thank you so much for asking it. Faith is absolutely essential in everything that we're doing as a human race together. And I thank you for your commitment to your political beliefs and your openness to come sit with people that may disagree. And I also thank you for your spirituality. I am a Buddhist, but I am immensely inspired by the teachings of Jesus Christ. My interpretation of Christianity is that Jesus is the embodiment of love, the embodiment of forgiveness and compassion, and those are things that, as I mentioned earlier, we are sorely in need of as a human society. As far as my own faith goes, I have a practice, if you guys follow me on Instagram or Facebook, where I take a picture, usually every day, sometimes I'll miss a day, but the picture is just as something I've noticed that day, like a sunset or a cloud or a tree. And the caption I give it is always the same caption. It says, existence equals basically good. And in Buddhism, we talk about a thing called basic goodness, which is essentially that our human existence is a basically good process, no matter what's happening, no matter what's going on, especially if in times of difficulty. And I've been immensely inspired by the Sikh community and the principle of Chardi Kala, which translates as rising spirit or relentless optimism. To me, that's a real great tie-in there. I interpret that as existence equals basically good. And it's essentially faith that life is always something to be grateful for. No matter what we're going through, and especially if we're going through difficulty. We can be grateful for the opportunity to practice compassion, grateful for the opportunity to learn and to grow. That faith is something that gets me through every single day. I have challenges in my personal life. I'm challenged by what's happening in our society today, like many of us are. And my faith that human beings are basically good creatures who have the need for compassion and the ability to give compassion is absolutely unshakable. And my faith that our existence is a basically good thing is also unshakable, thanks to the people I know like Pardeep who demonstrate that every day. I would add that if we look at violent extremist rhetoric, whether it's coming from a white supremacist hate group, it's coming from a far right group, far left group, whether it's coming from the so-called Islamic State, that rhetoric is meant to destroy our faith in each other, and it's meant to destroy our faith that this existence is a basically good thing. And so one of the most powerful things that we can all do to combat violent extremism is to refuse to give up that faith no matter what happens.
Thanks for the question. I was wondering if I could play off that. So Arno was raised it sounds like your parents loved you a lot. You made that very clear. But I want to ask Pardeep, as an educator, what can parents do? I mean, we all love our kids. We try to do the best we can, but are there specific things that people should be doing to try to ward off this issue of hate?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is specific things, and a lot of them tie back into identity and understanding the growth of children when they're at a certain age. Today, I'm a trauma therapist, and we work with some children. Most of the people that I work with are men escaping cycles of violence. But even with men, we have to understand them from growth development theories, meaning Erickson's growth development theory, Piaget's, whoever we want to talk about. But children are growing, and we have to nurture that growth. And so to understand them where they're at, and I think that's for a universal message, is that we can't be speaking at them, right? We got to be speaking with them and allowing them a sense of empowerment where they're at. I have 4 children. One of my children is probably the naughtier one out of the 3. out of the four. And I see a lot of similarities between the way that he acts, and he's very rebellious, very rebellious. He's the one with the longest hair, just super rebellious, and I see a lot of like him and Arno and some of our children that we have. And I think that what we can do as parents is, for one, the role of a parent, the role of father is the most important role that I have, and all other roles come second, or third or fourth. But with him, I have to understand that he's just wired a different way. We have personalities that we are given by birth. And there's a lot of epigenetics and stuff that goes into this as far as like generational DNA being passed down. And when we have a child who might kind of be like, okay, well, this one is kind of wild. I'll use my son. I have to channel that. So I have to know that if he is that way, what do I need to instill? Well, maybe discipline. Maybe I need to get him into karate. Maybe I need to get him into something where he can use his energy rather than trying to squelch it. And give him a sense of identity in whatever he's getting into. We've been working with a group called Search for Common Ground. And we were out in New York. The new thing now is apps and social media. There's this app that Arno and Search for Common Ground have been working on. It's called the Search for Humanity Battle.
It's called Battle for Humanity.
Battle for Humanity. And so kids do use this app to do good things in their community. And not that they need to be rewarded for it, but sometimes at that age, it takes a little bit of that rewarding principle to have an intrinsic belief in doing like service for just the sake of service. And so so those types of things are great for kids.
Sounds good. Do we have a question here?
Actually, it's a two-part question. As I thought this afternoon was just amazing, and I really want to thank everybody for your participation and our being able to hear you all. And as a retired psychologist, who has worked with trauma most of my career, I certainly believe that unprocessed trauma gets carried into the next generation, and often the victims become perpetrators. But there are a couple of questions swimming around in my brain as a cynic and as a questioner. Whether two things: whether compassion, kindness, and forgiveness, they're beginnings, but are they enough? And how do we address the inequity in resources that fuels some of the resentment? I'm not sure that compassion, kindness, and forgiveness, are enough of an answer in terms of a world that's increasingly diverse and a population that's changing, and there are haves and have-nots. And whether I don't want to polarize about political solutions, but I'm wondering where that fits, kind of as Arno was mentioning, your communist friend who wanted to fight back. That never works, but how do we deal with that? The other kind of related question is, you were talking about Buddhist ideology, and as a Jew, we believe that all people have an inclination toward good and also an inclination toward evil that needs to be channeled, mastered, however you think about it. And as a psychologist, I know there are some people who are simply lacking in empathy. And the more you try to teach them empathy, the more they use it to abuse other people. It's a very small portion of the population, but what about people whose ideology is not fueled by personal suffering or societal suffering, but by evil or a lack of empathy?
So the first question, I think, in 94, Jost had a theory, and it's a social justification theory. The social justification theory basically follows that we all somehow justify an unfair system by either whatever ideology we take on or whatever political belief we take on. We talked a lot about the civil rights movement today, and even after the murder of those 4 little girls, how policy was passed. The Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, right? Policy passed without without changing hearts and minds, is kind of for naught. So they both need to have a place at the table. We need to have policy, but we also need to have procedure. So we need to have laws, and we need to create fair systems, but we also need to understand that we need to be part of the system. Right now we have a lot of people who are yelling from the sidelines, and they're not becoming part of the change. They're not becoming part of the system. So therefore, those people who scream about it justify an unfair system. And obviously, we know about as far as conservatives, but we're not the sort of the right extreme ideology and what that does. So I'm not even going to have to speak on that. But I think as we're here right now, as we think about Madison and the progressiveness of Madison, what we need to do is start to think about what it was that got Donald Trump elected in the first place. Right? We could say that he didn't win a majority of votes, but he won way too many. And maybe what we're doing isn't working. And maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, are we justifying this system? And so the second part,
Yeah, as far as, and I get this a lot, like, well, kindness and forgiveness is all great, but oppression. And the issue with oppression is that it is always a subjective thing. By the very definition of intersectionality and people who write PhDs on oppression, me as a straight white man, there's no way that I can understand the oppression that a person of color goes through. There's no way I can understand the oppression that a transgendered person goes through or a gay person goes through. Yet I'm expected to navigate my life to this object that I can't even see. The thing about forgiveness and kindness and compassion is those are things that all human beings can relate to. Those are fixed reference points that everyone can navigate by. Oppression, by its very definition, is not a fixed reference point for everyone. Not only am I outside of these groups that are oppressed, but there are black people who don't believe they're oppressed. There's gay people who don't believe they're oppressed. The people who see the world through a oppression lens do not speak for monolithic blocks of people. They weren't elected to do that. And the systemic issues that affect these populations and that really drive the oppression narrative cannot be changed in an effective way without forgiveness, without kindness, without compassion. What happens when we try to change systemic issues without that kind of foundation is the Soviet Union, is Mao Zedong. It leads to brutality that makes Hitler look tame. So it's very important that we understand that. Again, kindness is not just a kumbaya, let's all get around and beat on drums together. It's a tactical thing. I want to see a society where all people are valued and included. That is my personal mission statement. I believe the only way to attain that kind of society is by cultivating kindness, compassion, and forgiveness on an ongoing and unconditional basis, refusing to give up faith in those things. And I've learned this from people like the Dalai Lama, who knows a thing or two about oppression. I've learned it from Thich Nhat Hanh, who knows a thing or two about oppression. It's very important that we don't let the oppression narrative cause us to shun the tools that can ultimately end the oppression.
I think the second part of the question was as far as those that lack empathy and those that might be diagnosed as having some kind of psychopathic, sociopathic tendencies, personality disorder, right? I think with that said, there probably is people who do lack empathy out there or don't have as much as other people do. I would say that sometimes we are too willing to give up on those people too quickly. Over my past 20 years, I've been a police officer, I've been an educator in the inner city. I have worked in 53206 for nearly 20 years of my life, which is for most people is what people would say the most violent area in Milwaukee. What I found is that even people they would have said, you know what, I just don't see it in that person's eyes. They have that gloss, and we would, as police officers, we would call it the 7 Mile stare, or they just have that stare. They're not really there. Even people like that, I have been able to elicit some kind of empathy, and even just I would be willing to work with just an inkling. If Wade Page, talking to Brian Murphy, he said, you know, when we were talking to Brian Murphy, Wade Page was looking at Brian right in his eyes and shooting him. He shot him 15 times from close range and looked him right in his eyes as Brian's looking him right back in his eyes. And I know for a fact that it was suffering that created Wade Page, not a lack of empathy. And for him, I think that if something would have been done a long time ago, if we were more responsible as a society, 6 immigrants would still be alive.
Was there another question I think we had back here?
I have a love and a hate relationship with America. Going back to it, in 1962, we had John Kennedy was shot. And I was in school at the time, and we were very much appalled by it. And we felt it like it was our neighbor. Then I went through some school. It was done by the Land Grant University, and this was in Ludhiana. And they have created what is called Norman Borlaug. They come with the 3 genetic varieties of wheat. That was the most compassionate and Christian work I could see America has done for us in our land. Then at the same time, we had America and Vietnam. At the same time, we have all those things going on. It's very hard to swallow which America we are talking about. And I came here with a curiosity to that. And I'm still at confusion where we are. My main question is basically, we preach a lot. Are we good in practice? Not yet. Half of the Muslim nations we have destroyed because of the greed and the oil. We go there and bomb every day, as of now, and we don't think they're children, or they're not even people. We are talking about Muslims are hated people, very bad people, jihadis. Who are these white supremacists? They are another jihadis. There's no difference between the two anyway. I think when we give it a different color, it becomes a totally different issue. When we cannot deal with the issue, we deal the mic up again. We take the camera again. So we definitely are not getting to the bone of it. I will give you a very simple example. I'm a Sikh, and Sikhs have won over Kabul in 1825. An Afghan is a man, very proud man. If you go and take a shelter in his home, he will give his life to defend you. What I am trying to say, we have to approach these people with the love. And we are trying to deal with the force, and not only that, half of the ugly force, Taliban, is created by America. Now we are paying the price of that. We go there and kill 100 people. If one of them kills over here, we think it's a 9/11. We got to start seeing inside. I hope. I'm not a very popular man. I will never be, and I don't look for that. Thank you.
I think that decision, as far as like which America we're talking about, is completely up to you. And I can go into the whole Native American story about the wolf and the wolf that we feed, told by the grandpa to the grandson. But there's a lot of wisdom to that. Say, well, which wolf wins, right? The one that we feed. And we have to sometimes think about, like, what is it that we're feeding that's causing this to get that way? And sometimes starving the fire might be the best strategy.
On the back of my book, the teaser paragraph ends with something to the effect of, My Life After Hate scrubs the scabs off the festering wound of racism and soothes with forgiveness and compassion. And when I was putting that together, a friend of mine, Angie Aker, who was editing for me, was like, this has to go. This is just disgusting. Like, no one's going to want to buy this book, seeing that. And I was like, no, that's staying. Not only because as a punk rocker, I was holding onto the back of a car trying to beat up some girls' boyfriends, and I flew off the car going 35 and had all the flesh torn off my hands and face, and I got it scrubbed off in the emergency room 24 hours later to clean it, because otherwise I could have died from an infection. The book itself was a spiritual scrubbing of scabs. It was reconciling wounds that I had that had never been properly cleaned, and until a wound is properly cleaned, it cannot heal. We as a society in the United States of America, and as a human race throughout the world, have massive, festering, untreated wounds caused by 500 years of white supremacy, caused by genocide, caused by slavery, and we need to reconcile those wounds. We need to tear the scabs off, which is going to hurt, and we need to talk about how people are still hurting from these offenses to our humanity, and we have to find ways to solve these problems. Again, that's never going to happen without kindness, gratitude, and forgiveness. If this process is done with anger and vengeance and an idea of a punitive justice, it's just going to make the wounds worse. So we as a society need to be honest about our past. I think our founding fathers, in the words "towards a more perfect union," really set the beacon that we should all follow, in that we can always be a better nation than we are. I agree with you in 100%, Masood. I believe America is great exactly the way it is, but it can be greater. We can work together to solve these problems, and we have to start by caring about each other unconditionally.
There's this Thursday will be the 5-year anniversary of Sandy Hook. I think it's this Thursday, yeah. And last time we were there, me and Arnold, it was just difficult to be there. It's a town that is just torn apart. And the biggest problem with it is there's really no acceptance. Dr. Joy DeGruy said that America's pathology is denial. We're not even accepting that there is a problem. And as we left this town, it was haunting. There's 20 kids missing. And we don't realize we have a problem. 20 first graders. We don't realize we have a problem. So we have to get to that and then really start to scrub these wounds that Arnold's talking about.
I think we had a question over here next.
I wanted to ask Pardeep, at the end of your talk, it sounded like you were making a call to action of attacking hate. I didn't really like the word attack, but I was wondering what you meant. How do we do that? What kind of action can we do? And the one thing I could think of is things like interrupting a racist comment or a sexist remark or a homophobic slur and speaking up. That's one thing that's pretty hard to do sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But what other things are you asking us to do, and what kind of skills do we need to do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What we can do is, and there's definitely, we don't mean to say that there is no policy. We have policymakers in here who are listening to you and your concerns right now as we speak. So there's definitely policy with this. With us, we have to go through our own process as well. After this happened, I had to go through my own process. You can sort of fake it, right? But then you really got to be like, okay, what is it? Something is affecting me and my ability to be a good father. Oh yeah, I'm thinking about if I'm going to be shot next, right? Some of the old wounds from policing were still there, of being hyper-vigilant, about being in Starbucks and thinking that an active shooter is going to come through, right? So I have to be really honest. So I think what we can do about this is be honest. And Dr. Kalika talked about it. He said, we need to cut through the bone. Interrupting a racist, sexist, definitely in the day and age of where we are right now, as far as the sexual assault and allegations and all that stuff coming out right now, we as men need to step up. Like, seriously, like we need to nurture and come back to, like, hey, you know what, fatherhood might not be just about disciplining. So there's so much that we can do. But I would say, in short, when I say attacking hate, I want to come back and say we need to also be forgiving, and we need to use forgiveness. And forgiveness, you can ask, everybody in this auditorium right now would have a different definition of what it is. For me, forgiveness is the ultimate vengeance, and it's to take that power back, right? So I think just in our own personal lives, start from there. Touch the people that are nearest and dearest to you. Sometimes when we're suffering, we don't really take it out on strangers. We take it out on those that are closest to us. So yeah, I hope that.
I would add to that too. When we're having discussions with people, if we witness someone making a racist comment, a homophobic comment, what I found very powerful, and in this day and age it's so necessary, is make this a personal thing. Because a lot of times when people are making comments like that, the comment comes from some nonsense they read in the backwaters of the internet. It's not from their personal experience. So I use my personal experience. I.e., somebody says all Muslims are terrorists, and I say, well, I've had the good fortune to work with a lot of Muslim people in counter-violent extremism efforts all over the world, all of whom, by the way, are risking their lives to keep us safe while we speak. And I know these people personally. They're good friends of mine. I love them. We've risked our lives for each other. And that inform your counter with personal experience. I've had, when I was doing IT, there were some guys running cable. It was after hours, and one of them saying like, "Oh, that looks like a Mexican did it." And I was like, "Excuse me, guys, but I have Mexican people in my family that I love dearly, who are just wonderful people, and they work very hard, and they actually have a really amazing attention to detail. So I don't know where you get this idea that Mexicans do sloppy work, or why you think it's okay to say that, but I just want you to know that hurts me, and I think it's wrong." And these guys were all of a sudden very apologetic. They were, well, I'm sorry. And I think that gets them to think a lot more than being like, hey, you bigot, shut up. Don't you ever say your hateful bigot stuff. You hateful bigot, get out of here. You're racist. It's all that's going to do is cut those lines off and diminish the chances that they can have an aha moment then.
All right, I think we had a question over here.
Yes, to me, the underlying problem, you've seen it throughout human history, is the existence of state-instituted violence. If you look at the United States, since the Second World War, we have engaged in many wars. For what reason? To survive, to make capitalism survive over communism, whatever the excuse was. 2 million killed in Vietnam, we lost 57,000. Why did we fight that war? And the legacy of this violence is perhaps seen in this individual who walked in there because he had a bad stretch in his life, but he was trained to be violent by the government.
All right, thanks. Do we have any other questions out there? Yeah.
I was just curious about the forgiveness piece of it. So I think this question is mostly for Pardeep, but maybe for both of you. I imagine that was a pretty messy process. Coming to terms with the act and the consequences for the community. And so I just wondered if you would shine a little light on how that process worked inside of you, and maybe tell us what some of those first meetings were like at the Thai restaurant.
Yeah. It's like you're my therapist, and everybody is. Yeah, it is definitely a messy process, and I think part of that is what led me into mental health. I think I was trying to cheat the system by not getting help myself, but trying to think that I was going to be of help. And I think sometimes as healers, and everybody here is a healer, we try to do that, but then we had to be really honest. And yeah, those first couple of conversations, even as we started to get to know one another, I had all that information coming into me. Like, once a white supremacist, always a white supremacist. You can't get rid of things like that. People don't change. And the more that I thought about that, I thought about the people saying it. And I said, you really don't think people can change? Like, when change is the only constant truth. Like, I would love to think that I would look like this forever, but
Not to look that good forever. Come on.
you could try. But yeah, it was extremely messy, and getting to know Arnold and saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna share a hotel room. Is he gonna murder me in my sleep the first time? And we do. Those are real conversations I'm having with my head, right?
I used his toothbrush once.
That's intimacy right
That was
there.
about as
Yeah.
ugly. He didn't know it till later that day.
I was like, what is this film? I'm just kidding. So there was that, right? There was this like, okay, I can work with him, but can I invite him to the house? Can I let him know where I live? Should he come in? And all that. So that's all very real. But then just having the courage to go forward, and yeah, now like it seems really weird to everybody, and I hope that it becomes more normal. But this man comes into the house, eats with us, watches the kids. The kids know him. They don't really even they kind of know his past, but they kind of like just Uncle Arnold. Honestly, that is like, oh yeah, Arnold, and they're kind of getting to know the story. My daughter, she's 12 now, so she kind of knows a little bit better. But it's definitely very personal. Forgiveness is huge, and one of the questions that the last crew out of, what was the TV thing? The last TV thing that we did? Documentary?
Today?
No, Netflix.
Showtime.
Showtime.
Yeah,
Showtime.
Active shooter.
Active shooter. So there's one called Active Shooter, and we were shooting, and he's like, this went to Columbine. This crew went to all over like different tragedies, and he was like, you're the only one that I've seen ever say the shooter's name. And he's like, why do you do that? Why do you say Wade Page without even like blinking? I'm like, because he's a person. I'm like, I'm not gonna make him out to be a monster. You can't do anything about monsters. He's a person. First and foremost, he's not gonna get that much power to be a monster. He's not a boogeyman. I don't fear any man, to tell you the truth. That's just the way it is. And that's from just years and years of people are just people.
Can I do a little follow-up? Because in the movie, there were some members of your religion who were saying within a week, we forgive Wade Page.
Yeah.
Did you at that point, or did it take longer?
Great question. I think at that point, I knew what I was supposed to do and the face that I was supposed to put on for the world. I was 36 years old. I had enough wherewithal to know what we should do. But then really going down that process, like you say, like going down that journey, that was the harder part. I wasn't really into my faith before this happened. I wouldn't go to the Gurdwara all that much. I wouldn't sit down and really read like what was in the scripture. But now you don't have to force me to do anything. I look at my faith and I'm like, oh, and me and my uncle will talk about it and say, what was this about? What was history this, that? So there was definitely rooted in my faith, but as a person, I had to go to that other place.
And how did you feel the day, was it one day where you finally said, okay, I'm done with hating this guy?
No, it was just gradual over time. It's just like, like, has anyone ever had that feeling when you're doing something, but you're almost clenching your teeth through it, and you're kind of like, okay, I got it. And days would be rougher than others. The book helped. We have a book coming out. It's called The Gift of Our Wounds. Me and Arnold would do it together. But going through the process of writing that book was difficult. There was a chapter about the shooting that I remember it took me 3 days to do, and every night I drank. And I'm not condoning drinking to anybody, but literally, like, I had to, like, because so much was being triggered about just that day itself. And the only thing that could get me to bed was, a drink of whiskey and a couple drinks of whiskey. But then you wake up the next day and you're kind of just stronger, and that process is gradual.
Pardeep and I are both super fortunate to be part of an organization called The Forgiveness Project. You can find it at theforgivenessproject.com. And it's essentially a collection of hundreds of stories of people who have suffered the worst horrors you can imagine. People who have had children murdered, lost limbs, lost parents, been kidnapped, been raped. And also people like myself who were former violent extremists and talk about how forgiveness changed us and changed our path, and really about self-forgiveness in my case. But working with the Forgiveness Project, I've learned that while forgiveness can very profoundly change the offender, it is primarily for the offended. And you can grant forgiveness regardless of where the offender is at, whether they're remorseful or not. Like, why leave that up to them? Why give them that power, as Pardeep said? When the offended grants forgiveness, they begin the process of removing the attachment to that harm so that they can get on with their life. They can heal, they can move forward. And in the case of the Forgiveness Project, almost every one of our peers there are people who have not only survived through horrific struggle, but who have transformed that struggle into something inspirational to help other people heal. And that couldn't have happened without forgiveness.
I think we've got a question right here.
Thank you for this afternoon. I'm thinking a lot about our children, and I'm wondering how Madison, Wisconsin, us, could bring the Serve to Unite to our children, to our schools, to our churches where they are. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Just contact us at pardeep@servetounite.org or arno@servetounite.org. But, you guys can reach us on Facebook, social media. We are already here. For us, Serve to Unite is not just an organization. It's a call to action. It's a movement. And we want everyone to be part of that movement. How we can do it, and it comes back to what we talked about, that process. Our children need to understand that the world does not happen to them, but happens for them. And that's an imagination switch. That's what we get worried about the most is that media and social media and all the stuff that's infiltrating their brains is telling them in their heart of hearts that the world is happening to you, right? It's why I get concerned, and I'm a former police officer. I get it. There's a discrimination, right? I get it that the way that Lady Justice's scales are offset. We get that, but I cannot have, if somebody's being like hit with 24/7, that a black man will be shot by an unarmed black man will be shot by a white officer unjustly, then what is basically happening is that that person is understanding, that community is understanding that the world is happening to them, and that creates a system justification. That creates this narrative of victimhood, this narrative of I can't do anything about this. We have kids right now who are just suffering because they feel so overwhelmed with anxiety. They think that things are just going to happen to them. So the imagination switches. No, it's not happening to you, but it's happening for you. Once you start to see that the world is happening for you, and even more of a switch to say the world is happening through you. Understand your own role and your own lens in this. And that is very much an imagination thing. We have clients who have been part of the foster care system, who have been abused sexually, physically, and they could rightfully say that the world is happening to them. But as a counselor, as a therapist, I can't let them say that. I can't let them go down that and just believe that everything is just going to happen to them, because then they can't do anything about it. So yes, problems are very system-oriented, but solutions are very personal.
In a practical sense, Serve to Unite works in schools. We've been working with young people from second grade through college for 5 years now. And recently, over the past maybe year and a half or so, Pardeep and I have been traveling to communities throughout the country, throughout the world, and initiating dialogues like this. Typically, when we do a community visit, we'll screen this film that you guys just saw. We'll have a discussion like this. We'll get local politicians involved. We'll get local leaders involved. And really just try to get everybody on the same page and understanding that we're all in this together and we got to work together to address these issues. As far as our school program goes, we are absolutely interested in expanding and reaching more schools. What we need to do that is what we call an educator champion. We need at least one educator at that school who can take the Serve to Unite program and run with it. When we start out a new school, Pardeep and I will visit there in person. We do an all-school assembly. We do a talk. We get the kids super fired up, like, this is what Serve to Unite's about. We want you to all be part of it. And then we do an all-day training with the educators to basically get them up to speed on how our program works, what service learning is all about, how our Global Mentor program works. And then we make all the connections for that educator to go forward. The educator and the students then need to carry it out from there. We're in touch all the time to answer questions. If it's a local school and it's feasible for us to come do follow-up visits, we can do that from time to time, but it's really up. We need an educator in that school who is like super stoked about Serve to Unite and really wants to carry it forward.
I think we have a question. We might be able to hear from the younger generation right now.
Oh,
What's your
yeah.
question?
Yeah, he's a reporter too. Be careful.
I'm just thinking about writing an article about this,
All right.
Awesome.
about United Against Hate and Serve to Unite. So I was just wondering, for Arno and Pardeep too, how has your organizations, United Against Hate, Serve to Unite, and all your other amazing things, how have they affected yourself, and how have they affected others?
Good question.
You guys, that was the best question of the night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, give him a hand. You know, for us, it's just, again, it's just connecting to like what we wanted to do with the rest of our lives. I don't wake up any day thinking about like punching the clock or anything like that, because I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and so that's a very fulfilling thing for us. I met Masood about a year ago and got to know the board here, and you guys are all doing amazing work, and just you know, just keep it up, and I think we're going to be needed in the next few years. So all these like collaborations that you guys have together, keep doing them, keep showing up, and God bless you all.
For me, personally, Serve to Unite and connecting with We Are Many United Against Hate has really brought me to a point in my life where I am literally grateful to be alive, grateful to take a breath every single day. I'm always super grateful. I'm no longer who I was 20 years ago. And I'm very driven to help other people who are under a self-imposed yoke of hate and violence to free themselves from that and to live a happy life also. And also, it's very important to me to help give a platform to people who have been the target of hate and violence, and to help them heal and to help them tell their stories. Those are all things that I'm able to do because of Serve to Unite, and I'm super grateful for that. I've realized that making service to other human beings a focus of your life is more important than making money a focus, than making any kind of accomplishing any other kind of goals. And that when you focus on service and you focus on our common humanity, that things like finance and the rest of that will fall into place.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I want to thank the board and the volunteers of this organization. Thank you, Masood, and thank you to Arno and Pardeep, and applaud them for sharing their story. I believe really strongly in stories since Masood invited us to participate, and we've been, I think, forgiveness stories. I'm seeing them all over the place, and I invite you to continue the conversation with your neighbors, look at the artwork, organizations who are in the lobby. But I wanted to share one story with you that, among many that I've run into since we started to think about this and work on this. Hector Black, a really extraordinary story. If you find that, there's both The Moth and Radio Lab, two public radio programs that he participated in on this story of loss and forgiveness that are very powerful. I'll leave it with Reverend Alex G. spoke in my neighborhood a couple years ago, and it ended with a really, really great question from one of the people who asked the Reverend G, I feel at a distance to some of these issues of equity. They're not really in my neighborhood, not really in my family. And what do I do? And first, he responded by saying, by being here, it's a start. But one thing that he pointed out was that some of the organizations who are working, in that case it was areas of equity, are some of the smallest, most interesting, and most underfunded organizations in our community. And his suggestion was to engage. Find those organizations, contribute to them, volunteer, find out what their issues are. And so I encourage you to take Reverend G's advice, which I probably always would encourage you to do, and engage in the organizations that you've met today. So thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Also, please thank John and Dee for their time to moderate this panel. Appreciate your help as well. So if you can stick around, there is a book signing here on the left side. Arno is going to sign his book, My Life After Hate. All the proceeds that he's going to collect today is going to go and support Serve to Unite. And on the behalf of We Are Many United Against Hate, we decided to buy all the books for him. So we are going to present a check to him. So every single penny that he collects goes to support his organization.